As I sat on that bench and clasped those letters in my burning embrace, I was suddenly aware that my scheme had received a final outline and that everything, or nearly everything, was already settled. A mere couple of details were still missing which would be no trouble to fix. What, indeed, does trouble mean in such matters? It all went on by itself. It all flowed and fused together, smoothly taking inevitable forms, since that very moment when I had first seen Felix. Why, what is that talk about trouble when it is the harmony of mathematical symbols, the movement of planets, the hitchless working of natural laws, which have a true bearing upon the subject? My wonderful edifice grew without my assistance. Yes, from the very start everything had complied with my wishes, and when now I asked myself what to write to Felix, I was hardly astonished to find that letter in my brain, as ready-made there as those congratulatory telegrams with vignettes that can be sent for a certain additional payment to newly married couples. It only remained to inscribe the date in the place left for it and the printed form. Let us discuss crime as an art, and card tricks. I am greatly worked up just as present. Oh, Conan Doyle, how marvelously you could have crowned your creation when your two heroes began to bore you. What an opportunity, what a subject you missed. For you could have written one last tale, concluding the whole Sherlock Holmes epic, one last episode beautifully setting off the rest. The murderer in that tale should have turned out to be not one-legged bookkeeper, not the cinnamon sheen, and not the woman in crimson, but the very chronicler of the crime stories, Dr. Watson himself, Watson who, so to speak, knew what was Watson. A staggering surprise for the reader. But what are they? Doyle, Dostoevsky, Leblanc, Wallace? What are all the great novelists who wrote of nimble criminals? What are all the great criminals who never read the nimble novelists? What are they in comparison with me? Blundering fools. As in the case of inventive geniuses, I was certainly helped by chance by meeting Felix, by that piece of luck fitted exactly into the place I had made for it. I pounced upon it and used it, which another in my position would not have done. My accomplishment resembles a game of patience, arranged beforehand. First I put down the open cards in such a manner as to make it a success of dead certainty. Then I gathered them up in opposite order, and gave the prepared pack to others with the perfect assurance it would come out. The mistake of my innumerable forerunners consisted of their laying principal stress upon the act itself, and in their attaching more importance to a subsequent removal of all traces than to most natural way of leading up to that same act, which is really but a link in the chain, one detail, one line in the book, and must be logically derived from all previous matter, such being the nature of every art. If the deed is planned and performed correctly, then the force of creative art is such that were the criminal to give himself up on the very next morning, none would believe him. The invention of art, containing far more intrinsical truth than life's reality. All this, I remember, sped through my mind, just as the time I was sitting with those letters in my lap. But then it was on one thing, now another. Now I would slightly amend the statement, adding to it that, as happens with wonderful works of art, which the mob refuses for a long time to understand, to acknowledge in the spell which it resists, the genius of a perfect crime is not admitted by people and does not make them dream and wonder. Instead, they do their best to pick out something that can be pecked at and pulled to bits, something to prod the author with so as to hunt him as much as possible, and when they think they have discovered the lapse they are after, hear their guffaws and jeers. But it is they who have erred, not the author. They lack his keen-sightedness and see nothing out of the common there, where the author perceived a marvel. After having laughed my fill, and then quietly and clearly thought out my next moves, I put the third and most vicious letter in my pocket-book and tore up the other two, throwing their fragments into the neighboring shrubbery, which at once attracted several sparrows, who mistook them for crumbs. When I sallied to my office, where I typed a letter to Felix with detailed indications as to when and where he should come, enclosed 20 marks, and went out again. I have always found it difficult to loosen my grip of the letter suspended above the abysmal chink. It is like diving into icy water or jumping from a burning balcony into what looks like the heart of an artichoke, and now it is particularly hard to let go. I gulped. I felt a queer sinking in the pit of my stomach, and still holding the letter, I proceeded down the street and stopped at the next letter box, where the same thing happened all over again. I walked on, burdened by the letter and fairly bending under that huge white load, and again beyond a block of houses I came to a letter box. My indecision was becoming a nuisance, as it was causeless and senseless in view of the firmness of my intentions. Perhaps it could be dismissed as a physical, mechanical indecision. A muscular reluctance to relax, or better still, it might be as a Marxist observer would put it, Marxism getting the nearest to absolute truth, as I always say, the indecision of an owner who is always loath, such being his very essence, to part with property. It is noteworthy that in my case the property is not confined merely to the money I was sending, but corresponded to that share of my soul which I had put into my letter. Be it as it might, I had already overcome my hesitation when I reached my 4th or 5th letter box. I knew as distinctly as I know that I am going to set down this sentence. I knew that nothing could prevent me from dropping now the letter into the slit, and I even foresaw the sort of gesture I would make immediately afterwards, brushing one palm against the other, as if some specks of dust had been left on my gloves by the letter, which being posted was mine no more, and so its dust was not mine either. That's done, that's finished. Such was the meaning of my imagined gesture. Nevertheless, I did not drop the letter in, but stood there, bending under the burden as before, and looking from under my brows, as 2 little girls playing near me on the pavement, they rolled by turns an iridescent marble, aiming at a pit in the soil near the curb. I selected the younger of the 2. She was a delicate little thing, dark-haired, dressed in a checkered frock. What a wonder she was not cold on that harsh February day, and patting her on the head, I said, "Look here, my dear. My eyes are so weak that I'm afraid of missing the slit. Do please drop this letter for me in the box over there." She glanced up at me, rose from her squatting position. She had a small face of translucent pallor and rare beauty, took the letter, gave me a divine smile accompanied by a sweep of her long lashes, and ran to the letter box. I did not wait to see the rest, and crossed the street, slitting my eyes that ought to be noted, as if I really did not see well, art for art's sake, for there was no one about. At the next corner I slipped into the glass booth of a public telephone and rang up Ardalian. It was necessary to do something about him, as I had decided long ago that this meddlesome portrait painter was the only person of whom I ought to beware. Let psychologists clear up the question whether it was the simulation of nearsightedness that by association prompted me to act at once toward Ardalian as I had long intended to act, or was it on the contrary, my constantly reminding myself of his dangerous eyes that gave me the idea of feigning nearsightedness. Oh, by the by, lest I forget, she will grow up, that child. She will be very good-looking and probably happy, and she will never know in what eerie business she had served as a go-between. Then also there is another likelihood, fate, not suffering such blind and naive brokerage, envious fate with its vast experience, assortment of confidence, tricks, and hatred of competition, may cruelly punish that little maiden for intruding, and make her wonder, whatever have I done to be so unfortunate? And never, never, never will she understand, but my conscience is clear. Not I wrote to Felix, but he wrote to me, and I sent him the answer, but an unknown child. When I reached my next destination, a pleasant cafe, in front of which, amid a small public garden, there used to play on summer evenings a fountain of changing colors, cleverly lit up from below by polychromatic projectors, but now the garden was bare and dreary, and no fountain twinkled, and the thick curtains of the cafe had won in their class struggle with loafing draughts. How racily I write, and what is more, how cool I am, how perfectly self-possessed, when, as I say, I arrived, Ardalian was already sitting there, and upon seeing me, he raised his arm in the Roman fashion. I took off my gloves, my hat, my white silk muffler, sat down next to him, and threw out on the table a packet of expensive cigarettes. "What are the good tidings?" asked Ardalian, who always spoke to me in a special fatuous manner. I ordered coffee and began approximately thus. "Well, yes, there is news for you. Of late I have been greatly worried, my friend, by the thought that you were going to the dogs. An artist cannot live without mistresses and cypresses, as Pushkin says somewhere, or should have said. Owing to the hardships you undergo and to the general suffiness of the way of living, your talent is dying, is pining away, so to speak. Does not squirt, in fact, just as that colored fountain in the garden over there does not squirt in winter." "Thank you for the comparison," said Ardalian, looking hurt. "That horror, that illumination in the caramel style. Or rather, you know, not discuss my talent, because your conception of ars pictoris amounts to an unprintable pun here. Lydia and I have often spoken," I went on, ignoring his dog Latin and vulgarity, "spoken about your plight. I consider you ought to change your surroundings, refresh your mind, imbibe new impressions." Ardalian winced. "What have surroundings to do with art?" he muttered. "Anyway, your present ones are disastrous for you, so they do mean something, I suppose. Those roses and peaches with which you adorn your landlady's dining room, those portraits of respectable citizens at whose houses you contrive to sup, well, really, contrive. And it may all be admirable, even full of genius, but, excuse my frankness, doesn't it strike you as rather monotonous and forced? You ought to dwell in some other clime, with plenty of sunshine. Sunshine is the friend of painters. I can see, though, this topic doesn't interest you. Let's talk of something else. Tell me, for instance, how do matters stand with that allotment of yours? Dashed if I know. They keep sending me letters in German. I'd ask you for a translation, but it bores me stiff. And, well, I either lose those things or just tear them up as they come. I understand they demand dimensional payments. Next summer I'll build a house there. That's what I'll do. Then they won't pull the land out from under it, I fancy. But you were speaking, my dear chap, about a change of climate. Go on, I'm listening. Oh, it's not much use. You are not interested. I talk since that nettles you. God bless you, why on earth should I be nettled? On the contrary, no, it's no use. You mentioned Italy, my dear chap. Fire away. I like the subject. I haven't really mentioned it yet, said I with a laugh. But as you have pronounced that word, I say, isn't it nice and cozy here? There are rumors that you have stopped, and by a succession of fillip under my jaw I produced a sound of gurgling bottleneck. Yes, cut out drink altogether. I'd not refuse one just now, though. The crackling a bottle with a friend affair, if you see what I mean. Oh, all right, I was only joking. So much the better, because nothing would come of it. Quite impossible to make me tight, so that's that. Hey-ho. How badly have I slept tonight? Hey-ho. Awful thing, insomnia, I went on, looking at him through my tears. Do pardon me for yawning like that. Ardalian, smiling wistfully, was toying with a spoon. His fat face with the leonine nose bridge was inclined. His eyelids, reddish warts, were lashes, half-screened his revoltingly bright eyes. All of a sudden he flashed a glance at me and said, if I took a trip to Italy, I'd indeed paint some gorgeous stuff. What I'd get out of selling it would at once go to settle my debt. Your debt? Got debts? I asked mockingly. Oh, drop it, Herman Karlovich, he said, using for the first time, I think, my name in patronymic. You quite understand what I'm driving at. Lend me 250 marks, or make it dollars, and I'll pray for your soul in all the Florentine churches. For the moment, take this to pay your visa, said I, flinging open my wallet. You have, I suppose, one of those nonsensical passports. Not a solid German one, as all decent people have. As for the visa, immediately, otherwise you spend this advance on drink. Shake hands, old man, said Ardalian. We both kept silent a while, he because he was brimming with feelings which meant little to me, and I because the matter was ended and there was nothing to say. Brilliant idea, cried Ardalian suddenly. My dear chap, why shouldn't you let Liddy come with me? It's darned dull here. The little woman needs something to amuse her. Now if I go by myself, you see she's of the jealous sort. She'll keep imagining me getting tight somewhere. Really do let her come away with me for a month, eh? Maybe she'll come later on. Maybe we'll both come. Long have I, very slave, been planning my escape to the far land of art and translucent grape. Good. I'm afraid I've got to go now. 2 coffees, that's all, isn't it? Chapter 8. Early next morning, it was not 9 yet, I made my way to one of the central underground stations, and there at the top of the stairs took up a strategical position. At even intervals, there would come rushing out of the cavernous deep a batch of people in briefcases. Up the stairs, shuffling and stamping, and every now and again somebody's toe would hit with a clank the metallic advertisement sign which a certain firm finds it advisable to affix to the front part of the steps. On the second one from the top, with his back to the wall and his hat in his hand, who was the first mendicant genius who adapted hat to the wants of his profession, there stood, stooping his shoulders as humbly as possible, an elderly witch. Higher still there was an assembly of newspaper vendors with coxcomb caps, and all hung about with posters. It was a dark, miserable day, in spite of my wearing spats. My feet were numb with cold. I wondered if perhaps they would freeze less if I did not get back shoes with a smart shine. A passing and repassing thought. At last, punctually, at 5 minutes to 9, just as I had reckoned, Orlovius's figure appeared from the deep. I at once turned and walked slowly away. Orlovius outstrode me, glanced back and exposed his fine but false teeth. Our meeting had the exact color of chance I wanted. Yes, I'm coming your way, said I in answer to his question. I've got to visit my bank. Dog's weather, said Orlovius, floundering at my side. How's your wife? Very well? Thanks, she is all right. And how are you going on? Not very well? He continued to inquire courteously. No, not very. Nerves, insomnia, trifles that would have amused me before now annoy me. Consume lemons, put in Orlovius. That would have amused me before, now annoyed me. For instance. I gave a slight snort of laughter, and produced my pocketbook. "I got this idiotic blackmailing letter, and it somehow weighs upon my mind. Read it if you like. It's a rum of a business." Orlovia stopped and scrutinized the letter closely. While he read, I examined the shop window near which we were standing. There, pompous and inane, a couple of bathtubs and various other lavatory accessories gleamed white, and next to it was a shop window with coffins, and there too looked pompous and silly. "Tut, tut," uttered Orlovius. "Do you know who has been writing this?" I popped the letter back into my wallet and replied with a snigger, "Of course I do. A rogue. He was at one time in the service of a distant relation of mine, an abnormal creature if not frankly insane. Got into his head that his family had deprived him of some inheritance. You know how it is, a fixed conviction with nothing can shatter." Orlovius explained to me with copious details the danger lunatics present to the community, and then inquired whether I was going to inform the police. I shrugged my shoulders. "Nonsense, not worth really discussing. Tell me, what do you think of the Chancellor's speech? Read it?" We continued to walk side by side, comfortably conversing about foreign and home politics. At the door of his office I started removing, as the rules of Russian politeness request, the glove for the hand I was going to proffer. "It is bad that you are so nervous," said Orlovius. "I pray you greet, please, your wife." "I shall do so by all means. Only, you know, I am pretty envious of your bachelorhood." "Why so?" "It's like this. Hurts me to speak of it, but you see, my married life is not happy. My wife has a fickle heart, and, well, she interested in somebody else. Yes, cold and frivolous, that's what I call her, and I don't think she'd weep long if I happened, you know what I mean. And do forgive me for airing such intimate troubles." "Certain things I have long observed," said Orlovius, nodding his head sagely and sadly. I shook his woolen paw, and we parted. It had all worked beautifully. Old birds like Orlovius are wonderfully easy to lead by the beak, because a combination of decency and sentimentality is exactly equal to being a fool. In his eagerness to sympathize with everybody, not only did he take sides with the noble, loving husband when I slandered my exemplary wife, but even decided privately that he had long observed, as he put it, a thing or two. I would give a lot to know what that purblind eagle could detect in the cloudless blue of our wedlock. Yes, it had all worked beautifully. I was satisfied. I would have been more satisfied had there not been some miscarriage about the getting of that Italian visa. Ardalian, with Lydia's help, filled out the application form, after which he was told that at least a fortnight would elapse till the visa could be granted. I had about 1 month before me till the 9th of March, and in the worst case I could always write to Felix changing the date. At last, late in February, Ardalian received his visa and bought his ticket. Moreover, I gave him 1,000 marks. It would last him, I hope, 2 or 3 months. He had managed to go on the 1st of March, but it transpired suddenly that he managed to lend the entire sum to a desperate friend and was now obliged to wait its return. A rather mysterious case, to say the least of it. Ardalian maintained that it was a matter of honor. I, on my part, am always most skeptical about such vague matters which involve honor, and mark you, not the honor of the ragged borrower himself, but always that of a third or even fourth party, whose name is not disclosed. Ardalian, always according to his tale, had to lend the money, the other swearing he would return it within 3 days, the usual time limit with those descendants of feudal barons. When that time had expired, Ardalian went to look for his debtor, and naturally could not find him anywhere. With icy fury I asked for his name. Ardalian attempted to evade the question, and then said, "Oh, you remember, that fellow who once called upon you." That made me lose my temper altogether. Upon regaining my calm, I could have probably helped him out, had not things been complicated by my being rather short of money, whereas it was absolutely necessary that I should have a certain amount about me. I told him to set forth as he was, with a ticket and a few marks in his pocket. I'd send him the rest, I said. He answered that he would do so, just postponing his departure for a couple of days in case the money might still be received. And indeed, on the 3rd of March, he rang up to say, rather casually I thought, that he had got back his loan and was starting the next evening. On the 4th, it turned out that Lydia, to whom for some reason or other Ardalian had given his ticket to keep for him, was at present incapable of recalling where she had put it. A gloomy Ardalian crouched on a stool in the hall. "Nothing can be done," he muttered repeatedly. "Fate is against it." From the adjoining rooms there came the banging of doors and a frantic rustling of paper. It was Lydia, hunting for the ticket. An hour later, Ardalian gave up and went home. Lydia sat on the bed, crying her heart out. On the 5th, she discovered the ticket among the dirty linen prepared for the laundry, and on the 6th, we went to see Ardalian off. The train was due to leave at 10:10. The longer hand of the clock could point like a setter, then pounce on the coveted minute. and forthwith aim at the next. No Ardalian. We stood waiting beside the coach marked Milan. What on earth is the matter? Lydia kept worrying. Why doesn't he come? I'm anxious. All that ridiculous fuss about Ardalian's departure maddened me to such an extent that I was now afraid to unclench my teeth, lest I have a fit or something on the station platform. Two sordid individuals, one sporting a blue mackintosh, the other a Russian-looking greatcoat with a moth-eaten astrakhan collar, came up and, dodging me, effusively greeted Lydia. Why doesn't he come? What do you think has happened? Lydia asked, looking at them with frightened eyes and holding away from her a little bunch of violets, which she had taken the trouble to buy for the brute. The blue mackintosh spread out his hands. The fur collar produced in a deep voice, Nesimus, we do not know. I felt I could not contain myself any longer, and returning sharply, marched off toward the exit. Lydia ran after me. Where are you going? Wait a bit, I'm sure he's... It was at this minute that Ardalian appeared in the distance. A grim-faced tatterdemalion held him up by the elbow and carried his portmanteau. So drunk was Ardalian that he could barely stand on his feet. The grim one, too, reeked of spirits. Oh dear, he cannot go in such a state, cried Lydia. Very flushed, very humid, bewildered and groggy, without his overcoat, in hazy anticipation of southern warmth, Ardalian started upon tottering round a slobbery of embraces. I just managed to avoid him. My name's Parabodov, professional artist, blurted his grim companion, confidently thrusting out, as if it had held a dirty postcard, an unshakable hand in my direction. Had the fortune of meeting you in the gambling hells of Cairo. Herman, do something. Impossible to let him go like that, wailed Lydia, tugging at my sleeve. Meanwhile, the carriage doors were already slamming. Ardalian, swaying and emitting appealing cries, had reeled off to follow the cart of the sandwich and brandy vendor, but was caught by friendly hands. Then all at once he gathered up Lydia in his clutch and covered her with juicy kisses. Oh, you googly kid, he cooed. Goodbye, kid. Thanks, kid. Look here, gentlemen, said I with a perfect calm. Would you mind helping me to lift him into the carriage? The train glided off. Beaming and bawling, Ardalian all but tumbled out of the window. Lydia, a lamb in a leopard's clothes, trotted alongside the carriage almost as far as Switzerland. When the last carriage turned its bumpers upon her, she bent low, peering under the receding wheels, a national superstition, and then crossed herself. She still held in her fists that little bunch of violets. Ah, what relief! The sigh I heaved filled my chest, and I let it out noisily. All day long Lydia gently fretted and worried, but then a wire came, 2 words, traveling merrily, and that suits her. I had now to tackle the most tedious part of the business. Talking to her, coaching her. I fail to remember the way I began, and when the current of my memory is turned on, the talk is already in full swing. I see Lydia sitting on the divan and staring at me with dumb amazement. I see myself sitting on the edge of the chair opposite her, and now and then, like a doctor touching her wrist, I hear my even voice going on and on. First I told her something which I had said I had never told anyone before. I told her about my younger brother. He was a student in Germany when the war broke out. He was recruited there and fought against the Russians. I had always remembered him as a quiet, despondent little fellow. My parents used to thrash me and spoil him. He did not show them any affection. However, but in regard to me, he developed an incredible, more than brotherly adoration, followed me everywhere, looked into my eyes, loved everything that came into contact with me, loved to smell my pocket handkerchief, to put on my shirt when still warm from my body, to clean his teeth with my brush. At first we shared a bed with a pillow at each end, until it was discovered he could not go to sleep without sucking my big toe, whereupon I was expelled to a mattress in the lumber room. But since he insisted on changing places with me in the middle of the night, we never quite knew, nor did dear Mama, who was sleeping where. It was not a perversion on his part, oh no, not at all, but it was best he could do to express our indescribable oneness, for we resembled each other so closely that our nearest relatives used to mistake us, and as the years went on, this resemblance grew more and more perfect. I remember that when I was seeing him off on his way to Germany, that was shortly before Princip's pistol shot, the poor fellow sobbed with such bitterness as though he foresaw what a long and cruel separation it would be. People on the platform looked at us, looked at those 2 identical youths who stood on interlocked hands and peered into each other's eyes with a kind of sorrowful ecstasy, and then came the war. Whilst languishing in remote captivity, I never had any news of my brother, but was somehow sure that he had been killed. Sultry years, black-shadowed years. I taught myself not to think of him, and even later, when I was married, not a word thereof did I breathe to Lydia. It was all too sad. Then, soon after my bringing my wife to Germany, a cousin, who took it as cue in passing just to utter that single line, informed me that Felix, though alive, had morally perished. I never learned the exact manner in which his soul was wrecked. Presumably his delicate physical structure did not withstand the strain of war, while the thought that I was no more, for strange to say he too was sure of his brother's death, that never would he see his adored double, or better say the optimal edition of his own personality. This thought crippled his mind. He felt as if he had lost both support and ambition, so that henceforth life could be lived anyhow, and down he went. That man, as sweet tuned as some musical instrument, now turned thief and forger, took to drugs, and finally committed murder. He poisoned the woman who kept him. I learned the latter affair from his own lips. He had not even been suspected, so cunningly had the evil deed been concealed. As to my meeting him again, well, that was the work of chance, a most unexpected and painful meeting, too, one of its consequences being that change in me, the depression which even Lydia had noticed in a cafe in Prague. He stood up, I remember, upon seeing me, opened his arms, and crashed backward in a deep swoon which lasted 18 minutes. It was horribly painful. Instead of the sluggish, dreamy, tender lad, I found a talkative madman, all jerks and jumps. The happiness he experienced upon being reunited with me, dear old Herman, who all at once, dressed in a handsome grey suit, had arisen from the dead, not only did this lull his conscience, but quite contrariwise convinced him of the utter inadmissibility of living with a murder on his mind. The conversation we had was awful. He kept covering my hands with kisses, bidding me farewell. Even the waiters wept. Very soon I realized that no human force in the world could now shake the decision he had informed of killing himself, and even I could do nothing. I, who always had such an ideal influence on him, the minutes lived through were anything but pleasant. Putting myself in his shoes, I could readily imagine the refined torture which his memory made him endure. I perceived, alas, the sole issue for him was death. God forbid anyone passing through such an ordeal, that is, seeing one's brother perish and not having the moral right to avert his doom. But now comes the complication. His soul, which has its mystical side, yearned for some atonement, some sacrifice. Merely putting a bullet through one's brain seemed to him not sufficient. I want to make a gift of my death to somebody, he suddenly said with his eyes embrimmed to the diamond light of madness. Make a gift of my death. We two are still more alike than we were formerly, and in our sameness I see a divine intent. To lay one's hands upon a piano does not yet mean the making of music, and what I want is music. Tell me, might I not benefit you some way to vanish from the earth? At first I did not heed his question. I supposed that Felix was delirious, and a gypsy orchestra in the cafe drowned part of his speech. His subsequent words proved, however, that he had a definite plan. So, on one hand the abyss of a soul in torment, on the other business prospects. In the lurid glare of his tragic fate and belated heroism, that part of his plan which concerned me, my profit, my well-being, seemed as stupidly matter-of-fact as, say, the inauguration of a railway during an earthquake. Having arrived at this point in my story, I stopped speaking, and leaning back in my chair with folded arms, looked fixedly at Lydia. She seemed to flow down from the couch and the carpet, crawled up to me on her knees, pressed her head against my thigh, and with a hushed voice started comforting me. "Oh, you poor, poor thing," she purred. "I'm so sorry for you, for your brother. Heavens, what an unhappy people there are in the world. He mustn't die. It is never impossible to save a person." "He can't be saved," said I, with his called, I believe, a bitter smile. "He is determined to die on his birthday, the 9th of March. That is to say, the day after tomorrow, and the President of the State would not prevent it. Suicide is the worst form of self-indulgence. All one can do is to comply with the martyr's whim and brighten up things for him by granting him the knowledge that in dying he performs a good useful deed, a crude material nature perhaps, but anyhow useful." Lydia hugged my leg and stared up at me. "His plan is as follows," I went on in a bland voice. "My life, say, is insured for $500,000. In a wood somewhere my corpse is found, my widow, that is you—" "Oh, stop saying such horrors," cried Lydia, scrambling up from the carpet. "I've just been reading a story like that. Oh, do please stop. My widow, that is you, collects the money. Then she retires to a secluded place abroad. After a while, under an assumed name, I join her, and maybe even marry her, if she is good. My real name, you see, will have died with my brother. We resemble each other. Don't interrupt, like 2 drops of blood, and he'll be particularly like me when dead. Do stop, do stop. I don't believe there is no way of saving him. Oh, Herman, how wicked. Where is he actually? Here in Berlin? No, in another part of the country. You keep repeating like a fool, save him, save him. You forget he is a murderer and a mystic. As to me, I haven't the right to refuse him a little thing that may lighten and adorn his death. You must understand that here we find ourselves entering a higher spiritual plane. It would be one thing if I said to you, 'Look here, old girl, my business is going badly, I'm faced with bankruptcy, I'm also sick of everything, and I yearn for a remote land where I'll devote myself to contemplation and poultry breeding. So let us use this rare chance.' But I say nothing of the sort. Although I am on the brink of ruin, and for ages have been dreaming, as you know, of life in the lap of nature, what I do say is something very different, namely, whoever However terrible it may be, one cannot deny one's own brother the fulfillment of his dying request. One cannot forbid him from doing good, if only posthumous good. Lydia's eyelids fluttered. I had quite bespit her, but despite shouting of my speech, she nestled against me, holding me tight. We were both now on the divan, and I continued, "A refusal of that kind would be a sin. I don't want it. I don't want to load my conscience with sin that weight." Do you think I didn't object and try to reason with him? Do you think I find it easy to accept his offer? Do you think I have slept all these nights? I may as well tell you, my dear, that since last year I have been suffering horribly. I would not have my best friend suffer so. Much do I care indeed for that insurance money. But how can I refuse? Tell me, how can I deprive him of one last joy? Hang it all, it's no good talking. I pushed her aside, almost knocking her off the divan, and started marching to and fro. I gulped, I sobbed, spectres of red melodrama reeled. "You are a million times cleverer than me," half whispered Lydia, wringing her hands. Yes, reader, Dixie, wringing her hands. But it is all so appalling, so unexpected. I thought it only happened in books. Why means... Oh, everything will change completely, our whole life. Why, for instance? What about our Dalian? To heck with him. Here we are discussing the very greatest human tragedy, and you plump in with... No, I just asked like that. You sort of dazed me. My head feels quite funny. I suppose that not exactly now, but later on. It will be possible to see him and explain matters. Herman, what do you think? Drop worrying about trifles. The future will settle all that. Really, really, really. My voice suddenly changed to a shrill scream. What an idiot you are. She melted into tears, and that was all at once a yielding creature quivering on my breast. Please, she faltered, please forgive me. Oh, I am a fool. You are right. Do forgive me. This awful thing happening. Only this morning everything seemed so nice, so clear, so everydayish. Oh, my dear. I am most terribly sorry for you. I'll do anything you want. What I want now is coffee. I'm dying for some coffee. Come to the kitchen, she said, wiping her tears. I'll do anything, but please stay with me. I'm frightened. In the kitchen, already appeased, though still sniffing little, she poured the big brown coffee beans into the open bill of the mill, compressed it between her knees, and began turning the handle. It went stiffly at first with many creak and crackle, and then there was a sudden easement. Imagine, Lydia, said I, sitting on the table and dangling my legs, imagine that all I'm telling you is fiction. Quite seriously, you know, I've been trying to make myself believe that it was purely an invention of mine or some story I had read somewhere. It was the only way to not go mad with horror. So listen. The two characters are an enterprising self-destroyer and his insured double. Now, as the insurance company is not obliged to say in cases of suicide, I've made it very strong, said Lydia. You'll like it. Yes, dear, I'm listening. The hero of this cheap mystery story demands the following measures. The things should be staged in such a manner as to make it appear a plain murder. I do not want to enter into technical details, but there it is in a nutshell. The gun is fastened to the tree trunk, a string tied to the trigger, and the suicide turns away, pulling that string, and gets shot bang in the back. There's a rough outline of the business. Oh, wait a bit, cried Lydia. I've remembered something. He somehow fixed the revolver to the bridge. No, that's right. Sorry, that's wrong. He first tied a stone with a string. Let me see, how did it go? Ah, I've got it. He tied a big stone to one end of the revolver, to the other, and then shot himself. And the stone fell in the water, and the string followed across the parapet, and the revolver came next, all splashed into the water. Only I can't remember why it was necessary. Smooth water, in brief, and a dead man left on the bridge. What a good thing coffee is. I had a splitting headache. Now it's much better. So that's clear to you, more or less. I mean, the way it all has to happen. I sipped the fiery coffee and meditated the while. Odd, she had no imagination whatever. In a couple of days, life changes topsy-turvy. A regular earthquake, and here she was comfortably drinking coffee with me and recalling some Sherlock Holmes adventure. I was mistaken, however. Lydia started and said, slowly lowering her cup, I'm just thinking, Herman, but if it's all going to be so soon, then we ought to begin packing. And oh dear, there's all that linen in the wash, and your tuxedo is at the cleaner's. First, my dear, I'm not particularly anxious to be cremated in evening dress. Secondly, pluck out of your head, quick and for good, the idea that you ought to act somehow, to prepare things and go on. There is nothing you ought to do for the simple reason that you know nothing, nothing whatever. Make a mental note of that, if you please. So no mysterious illusions in front of your friends, no bustle, no shopping. Let that sink in, my good woman, otherwise we'll all get into trouble. I repeat, you know nothing as yet, as tomorrow. Your husband goes for a drive in his car and fails to return. It is then, and only then, that your work begins. Very responsible work, though quite simple. Now I want you to listen with the utmost attention. On the morning of the 10th, you'll phone to Orlovius, telling him I've gone, not slept at home, and not yet returned. You'll ask what to do about it, and act according to his advice. Let him generally take full possession of the case, doing everything such as informing the police, etc. The body will turn up very soon. It is essential that you should make yourself believe I'm really dead. As things stand, it won't be very far from the truth, as my brother is part of my soul. I'd do anything, she said, anything for his sake and yours, only I'm dreadfully frightened. It is all getting mixed up in my head. Let it not get mixed up. The chief thing is naturalness of grief. It may not exactly bleach your hair, but it must be natural. In order to make your task easier, I've given Orlovius a hint to the effect that you've ceased loving me for years. So let it be the quiet, reserved sort of sorrow. Sigh and be silent. Then when you see my corpse, that is, the corpse of a man indistinguishable from me, you're sure to get a real good shock. I can't, Herman. I'll die of fright. It would be worse if right in the mortuary you started powdering your nose. In any case, contain yourself. Don't scream. Or else it'll be necessary after the screams to raise the general level of your grief. And you know what a bad actress you are. Now let us proceed to the policy of my testament. You are in the middle of the drawer of my desk. After having had my body burnt in agreement with my testament, after settling all formalities, after receiving through Orlovius your due, and doing with the money what he tells you to, you'll go abroad to Paris. When will you stop in Paris? I don't know, Herman. Try and remember where it was we put up when we were in Paris together. Well, it's coming back to me now. Hotel. But what hotel? I can't remember a thing, Herman. When you keep looking at me like that, I tell you it's coming back. Hotel something. I'll give you a tip. It has to do with grass. What's the French for grass? Wait a sec. Herbe. Oh, I've got it. Malherbe. To be quite safe, in case you forget again, you can always look at the back trunk. There's a hotel label on it still. Look here, Herman, I'm really not in such a muff as all that, though I think I'd better take that trunk, the black one. So that's the place you stop at. Next there comes something extremely important. First, however, I'll trouble you to say it all over again. I'll be sad, I'll try not to cry too much. Orlovius, 2 black dresses and a veil. Not so fast. What will you do when you see the body? Fall on my knees, not scream. That's right. You see how nicely it all shapes out. Well, what comes next? Next, I'll have him buried. In the first place, not him, but me. Please don't get that muddled. In the second, not burial, but cremation. Nobody wants to be dishumed. Orlovius will inform the pastor of my emeritus, moral, civic, matrimonial. The pastor in the crematorium chapel will deliver a heartfelt speech. To the sound of organ music, my coffin will slowly sink into Hades, that's all. What after that? After that, Paris. No, wait. First, all kinds of money formalities. I'm afraid, you know, Orlovius will bore me to death, and then in Paris I'll go to the hotel. Now I knew it would happen. I just thought I'd forget, and so I have. You sort of oppress me. Hotel. Oh, Malherbe. For safety, the trunk. Black. Now comes the important bit. As soon as you get to Paris, you let me know. What method should I adopt to make you memorize the address? Better write it down, Herman. My brain simply refuses to work at present. I'm so horribly afraid I shall bungle it all. No, my dear, I shan't write anything down. If only for the reason that you're bound to lose anything and put down writing. You'll have to memorize the address, whether you like it or not. There is absolutely no other way. I forbid you once and for all to write it down. That clear? Yes, Herman, but what if I can't remember? Nonsense. The address is quite simple. Post Office, Pigman, France. That's where Aunt Elisa used to live? Oh, yes, that's not hard to remember, but she lives near Nice now. Better go to Nice. Good idea, but I shan't. Now comes the name. For the sake of simplicity, I suggest you write thus. Monsieur Malherbe. She is probably as fat and as lively as ever. Do you know, Ardalian wrote to her asking for money, but of course, most interesting, I'm sure, but we are talking of business. What name will you write on the address? You haven't told me yet, Herman. Yes, I have. I suggested Monsieur Malherbe. Yes, but that's a hotel, Herman, isn't it? Exactly, that's why. You'll find it easier to remember by association. Oh, Lord, I'm sure to forget the association, Herman. I'm hopeless. Please let's not have any associations. Besides, it's getting awfully late, and I'm exhausted. Then think of a name yourself. Some names you're practically certain to remember. Would perhaps Ardalian do? Very well, Herman. So that's settled too. Monsieur Ardalian, Post Office, Pignan. Now the contents. You'll begin. Dear friend, you have surely heard about my bereavement, and so on in the same gist. A few lines in all. You'll post the letter yourself. Got that? Very well, Herman. Now will you please repeat? You know the strain is too much for me. I'm going to collapse. Good heavens, 1:30. Couldn't we leave it till tomorrow? Tomorrow you will have to repeat it all the same. Come, let's get it over. I'm listening. Hotel Malherbe. I arrive. I post the letter. Myself, Ardalian. Post Office, Pignan, France. And after I've written, what next? No concern of yours. We'll see. We can be certain you'll manage it properly. Yes, Herman, only don't make me say it all over again. I'm dead beat. Standing in the middle of the kitchen, she expanded her shoulders, threw back her head, and shook it violently, and said several times, her hands worrying her hair, "Oh, how tired I am! Oh, how—" That how opened into a yawn. We turned in at last. She undressed, scattering about the room, frocks, stockings, various feminine odds and ends, tumbled into bed, and settled down at once to a comfortable nasal wheeze. I went to bed too and put out the light, but could not sleep. I remember suddenly awoke and touched my shoulder. "What do you want?" I inquired, feigning drowsiness. "Herman," she muttered. "Herman, tell me. I wonder if... Don't you think it's a swindle?" "Go to sleep," I replied. "Your brains are not equal to the job. Deep tragedy, and you with your nonsense. Go to sleep." She sighed blissfully, turned on her side, and was immediately snoring again. Curious, although I did not deceive myself in the least regarding my wife's capacities, well knowing how stupid, forgetful, and clumsy she was, I had somehow no misgivings. So absolutely did I believe her devotion would make her take instinctively the right course, preserving her from any slip, and what mattered most, forcing her to keep my secret. In fancy I clearly saw the way Orlovius would glance at her bad imitation of sorrow, and sadly wag his solemn head, and who knows, ponder and perhaps upon the likelihood of her poor husband's having been done in by the lady's paramour. But then that threatening letter with the nameless lunatic would come to him as a timely matter. The whole next day we spent at home, and once more, meticulously and strenuously, I kept tutoring my wife, stuffing her with my will, just as a goose is crammed by force with maize to fatten its liver. By nightfall she was scarcely able to walk. I remained satisfied with her condition. It was time for me to get ready too. I remember how I racked my brains for hours calculating what sum to take with me, what to leave Lydia. There was not much cash, not much at all. It occurred to me that it would be wise to take some valuable things, so I said to Lydia, "Look here, give me your Moscow brooch." "Oh yes, the brooch," she said dully, slunk out of the room, but immediately came back, lay down on the divan, and began to cry as she had never cried before. "What's the matter, you wretched woman?" For a long time she did not answer, and then, amid much silly sobbing, and with averted eyes, explained that the diamond brooch, an empress's gift to her great-grandmother, had been pawned to obtain the money for our Dalian's journey, as his friend had not repaid him. All right, don't howl," I said, pocketing the pawn ticket. "Deuced cunning of them. Thank God he's gone. He's scuttled away. That's the main thing." She instantly regained her composure, and even achieved a bright smile when she saw I was not cross. Then she tipped off to the bedroom, was long rummaging there, and finally brought me a cheap little ring, a pair of eardrops, an old-fashioned cigarette case that had belonged to her mother. "None of these things did I take. Listen," said I, wandering about the room and biting my thumb. "Listen, Lydia, when they ask you if I had enemies, when they examine you as to who might have killed me, reply, 'I don't know,' and there's something else. I'm taking a suitcase with me, but that's strictly confidential. I ought not to appear as though I was getting ready for a journey. That would be suspicious. As a matter of fact..." At that point I remember stopping suddenly. How queer it was, when all that had been so beautifully devised and foreseen, there should come some sticking out a minor detail, as when you are packing and noticing all at once that you have forgotten to put in some small and cumbersome trifle. Yes, there do exist such unscrupulous objects. It should be said to my justification that the question of the suitcase was really the only point which I decided to alter. All the rest was just as I designed it long ago. Maybe many months ago, maybe that very second when I saw a tramp asleep on the grass who exactly resembled my corpse. No, thought I, better not take the suitcase. There is always the risk of somebody seeing me leaving the house with it. I'm not taking it, said I aloud, and went on pacing the room. How can I forget the morning of the 9th of March? As mornings go, it was pale and cold, and overnight some snow had fallen, and now every house porter was sweeping a stretch of sidewalk along which there ran a low snow ridge, whereas the asphalt was already clean and black and only a little slimy. Lydia slept on in peace. All was quiet. I began the business of dressing. That is how it went, 2 shirts over one another, yesterday's one on top, as it was meant for him, drawers also 2 pairs, and again the top pair was for him. Then I made a small parcel containing a manicure set, a shaving kit, and a shoehorn. So as not to forget, I at once slipped that parcel into the pocket of my overcoat and was hung in the hall. Then I put on 2 pairs of socks, the top one with a hole in it, its black shoes, mouse gray spats, and a grade thus, smartly shod, but still in my undergarments. I stood in the middle of the room and mentally checked my actions so as to see whether they conformed to plan. Remembering that an extra pair of garters would be required, I unearthed some old ones and added them to the parcel, which necessitated coming out again into the hall. Lastly, I chose my favorite lilac tie and a thick dark gray suit I had been often wearing lately. The following objects were distributed among pockets: my wallet, with something like 1,500 marks in it, passport, sundry scraps of paper with addresses, accounts. Stop, that's wrong, I said to myself, for I had not decided not to take my passport. A very subtle move that. The casual scraps of paper established one's identity more gracefully. I also took keys, cigarette case, lighter, snapped him on my wristwatch. Now I was dressed. I patted my pockets, I puffed slightly. I felt rather warm in my double cocoon. There now remained the most important item, quite a ceremony, the slow glide of the drawer where it rested. A careful examination, and not the first one, to be sure. Yes, it was admirably oiled. It was chock full of good things. It was given to me in 1920 in Raval by an unknown officer, or to be precise. He simply left it with me and vanished. I have no idea what became of that amiable lieutenant afterwards. While I was thus engaged, Lydia awoke. She wrapped herself up in the dressing gown of a sickly pink hue, and we sat down on our morning coffee. When the maid had left the room, "Well," I said, "the day has come. I'm going in a minute." A very slight digression in literary nature. The rhythm is foreign to modern speech, but it renders especially well my epic calm and the dramatic tension of the situation. "Herman, please stay. Don't go anywhere," said Lydia in a low voice, as she had joined her hands together, I believe. "You remember everything, don't you?" I went on imperturbably. "Herman," she repeated, "don't go. Let him do whatever he likes. It is his fate. You mustn't interfere." "I'm glad you remember everything," said I with a smile. "Good girl. Now let me eat one more roll, and I'll start." She broke into tears, then blew her nose with a last blast, was about to say something, but began crying anew. It was rather a quaint scene. I coolly buttering a horn-shaped roll, she seated opposite, her whole frame shaken by sobs. I said with my mouth full, "Anyway, you'll be able, in front of the world," I chewed and swallowed here, "to recall that you had evil forebodings, although I used to go away fairly often and never said where. And do you know, madame, if he had any enemies?" "I don't, Mr. Coroner." "But what's going to come next?" Lydia gently mowed, slowly and helplessly moving her hands apart. "That'll do, my dear," said I in another tone of voice. "You've had your little cry, and now it's enough. And by the way, don't dream of howling much today in Elise's presence." She dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled handkerchief, and then did a sad little grunt, and once again made that gesture of helpless perplexity, but now in silence and without tears. "You remember everything?" I inquired for the last time, narrowly scrutinizing her. "Yes, Herman, everything, but I'm so frightened." I stood up, and she stood up too. I said, "Goodbye, see you some day. Time to go with my patient." "Herman, tell me, you don't intend being present, do you?" I quite failed to see what she meant. "Present? What?" "Oh, you know what I'm thinking. When you know, that business with the string." "You goose," I said. "What did you expect? Somebody must be there to tidy up afterwards. Now I'll trouble you not to brood any more over the matter. Go to the pictures tonight. Goodbye, goose." I never kissed her on the mouth. I loathe the slush of lip kisses. It is said the ancient Slavs, too, even in moments of sexual excitement, never kissed their women, found it queerish, perhaps even a little repulsive, to bring into contact one's own naked lips with another's epithelium. At that moment, however, I felt for once an impulse to kiss my wife that way, but she was unprepared, so somehow nothing came of it except that I grazed her hair with my lips. I refrained from making another attempt, instead of which I clicked my heels and shook her listless hand. Then in the hall I rapidly got into my overcoat, snatched my gloves, ascertained whether I had the parcel, and when already making for the door, heard her call from the dining room in a low whimpering voice, but I did not take much notice as I was in a desperate hurry to leave. I crossed the backyard towards a large garage packed with cars. Pleasant smiles welcomed me there. I got in and started the engine. The asphalted surface of the yard was somewhat higher than that of the street, so that upon entering the narrow inclined tunnel connecting the yard with the street, my car, held back by its brakes, lightly and noiselessly dipped. Chapter 9. To tell the truth, I feel rather weary. I keep on writing from noon to dawn, producing a chapter per day, one more. What a great powerful thing art is in my situation. I ought to be flustering, scurrying, doubling back. There is of course no immediate danger, and I dare say such danger there will never be, but nevertheless it is a singular reaction, this sitting still and writing, or ruminating at length, which is much the same really, and the further I write the clearer it becomes that I will not leave matters to but hang on till my main object is attained, when I will most certainly take the risk of having my work published, not much of a risk either, for as soon as my manuscript is sent out I shall fade away, the world being large enough to afford a place of concealment to a quiet man with a beard. It was not spontaneously that I decided to forward my work to the penetrating novelist, whom I think I have mentioned already, even addressing him personally through the medium of my story. I may be mistaken, as I have long ago abandoned reading over what I write. No time left for that, let alone its nauseating effect upon me. I had first toyed with the idea of sending the thing straight to some editor, German, French, or American, but it is written in Russian, and not all is translatable, and well, to be frank, I am rather particular about my literary coloratura, and firmly believe that the loss of a single shade of an inflection would hopelessly mar the whole. I have also thought of sending it to the USSR, but I lack the necessary addresses, nor do I know how it is done or whether my manuscript would be read, for I employ by force of habit the old regime spelling, and to rewrite it would be beyond my powers. Did I say rewrite? Well, I hardly know if I shall stand the strain of writing it at all. Having at last made up my mind to give my manuscript to one who is sure to like and do his best to have it published, I am fully aware of the fact that my chosen one, you, my first reader, is an immigrant novelist whose books cannot possibly appear in the USSR. Maybe, however, an exception will be made for this book, considering that it was not you who actually wrote it. Oh, how I cherish the hope that in spite of your immigrant signature, the diaphanous spuriousness which will deceive nobody, my book may find a market in the USSR. As I am far from being an enemy of the Soviet rule, I am sure to have unwittingly expressed certain notions in my book which correspond perfectly to the dialectical demands of the current moment. It even seems to me sometimes that my basic theme, the resemblance between two persons, has a profound allegorical meaning. This remarkable physical likeness probably appealed to me subconsciously as the promise to that ideal sameness which is to unite people in the classless society of the future. And by striving to make use of the isolated case, I was, though still blind to social truths, fulfilling nevertheless a certain social function. And then there was something else. The fact of my not being wholly successful when putting that resemblance of ours to practical use can be explained away by purely social economic causes. That is to say, the fact that Felix and I belong to different, sharply defined classes, the fusion of which none can hope to achieve single-handed, especially nowadays when the conflict of classes has reached a stage where compromise is out of the question. True, my mother was of low birth. My father's father herded geese in his youth, which explains where exactly a man of my stamp and habits could have got the strong, though still incompletely expressed leaning towards genuine consciousness and fancy. I visualize a new world where all men will resemble one another as Herman and Felix did, a world of helixes and ferments, a world where the worker fallen dead at the feet of his machine will be at once replaced by his perfect double, smiling the serene smile of the perfect socialism. Therefore, I do think that Soviet youths of today should derive considerable benefit from a study of my book under the supervision of an experienced Marxist who would help them to follow through its pages the rudimentary wriggles of social message it contains. I let other nations too translate it into other respective languages so that my American readers may satisfy their cravings for glory glamour. The French discern mirages of sodomy in my partiality for a vagabond, and Germans relish the skittish side of the semi-Slavic soul. Read it as many as possible, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all as my readers. Not an easy book to write, though. It is now especially, just as I am getting to the part which treats, so to speak, of decisive action. It is now the arduousness of my task appears to me in full. Here I am, as you see, twisting and turning in that garrulous about matters which rightly belong to the preface of the book are misplaced in what my reader may deem its most essential chapter. But I have tried to explain already that however shrewd and wary my approaches may seem, it is not my rational part which is writing, but solely my memory, that devious memory of mine. For you see then, i.e. at the precise hour at which hands my story have stopped, I stopped too, was dallying, as I am dallying now, was engaged in a similar kind of tangled reasoning, having nothing to do with my business, the appointed hour of which I was steadily nearing. I had started in the morning, though my meeting with Felix was fixed for 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had been unable to stay at home, so that now I was wondering how to dispose of that dull white mass of time separating me from my appointment. I sat at my ease, even solemnity, as I steered with one finger, and slowly drove through Berlin, down quiet, cold, whispering streets, and so it went on, until I noticed that I left Berlin behind. The colors of the day were reduced to a mere two. Black, the pattern of the bare trees, the asphalt, and whitish, the sky and the patches of snow. It continued my sleepy transportation. For some time there dangled before my eyes one of those large, ugly rags in the trunk. Trundling something long and poky is required to hang on the protruding hind end. Then it disappeared, having presumably taken a turning. Still, I did not move on any quicker. A taxicab dashed out of a side street in front of me, put on the brakes with a screech, and owing to the road being rather slippery, went into a grotesque spin. I calmly sailed past as if drifting downstream. Farther, a woman in deep mourning was crossing obliquely, practically with her back to me. I neither sounded my horn, nor changed my quiet, smooth motion, but glided past with a couple of inches from the edge of her veil, that she did not even notice me, a noiseless ghost, Every kind of vehicle overtook me for quite a while. A crawling tramcar kept abreast of me, and out of the corner of my eye could see passengers stupidly sitting face to face. Once or twice I struck badly a cobbled stretch, and hens were already appearing. Short wings expanded and long necks stretched out. This fell or that would come running across the road. A little later I found myself driving along an endless highway past stubbled fields, with snow lying here and there, and in a perfectly deserted locality my car seemed to sink into a slumber as if turning from blue to dove-gray, slowing down gradually and coming to a stop. I leaned my head under the wheel and to a fit of elusive musing. What could my thoughts be about? About nothing or nothings? It was all very involved, and I was almost asleep. In a half-swoon I kept deliberating with myself about some nonsense, kept remembering some discussion I had with somebody else or on some station platform, as to whether one ever sees the sun in one's dreams, and presently the feeling grew upon me that there was a great number of people around, all speaking together, and then falling silent or giving one another dim errands, and dispersing without a sound. After some time I moved on, and at noon, dragging through some village, I decided to halt, since even at such a drowsy pace I was bound to reach Königsdorf in an hour or so, and that was still too early. So I dawdled in a dark and dismal beer-house, where I sat quite alone in the back room of sorts at a big table, and there was an old photograph on a wall, a group of men in frock coats, with curled-up mustachios, and some to the front row had bent knee, with a carefree expression, and two at the sides and even stretched themselves seal fashion, and this called to mind similar groups of Russian students. I had a lot of lemon water, and there resumed my journey, in the same sleepy mood, quite indecently sleepy, in fact. Next I remember stopping at some bridge. An old woman in blue woolen trousers, and with a bag behind her shoulders, was busy repairing some mishap to her bicycle. Without getting out of my car, I gave her several pieces of advice, all quite unhidden and unuseless, and after that I was silent, popping my cheek with my fist, remaining gasping at her for a long time, and there she was fussing and fussing, but at last my eyelids twitched, and lo, there was no woman there. She had wobbled away long ago. I pursued my course, trying as I did to multiply in my head one uncouth number by another just as awkward. I did not know what they signified and whence they had floated up, but since they had come I considered it fit to bait them, and so they grappled and dissolved. All of a sudden it struck me that I was driving at a crazy speed, and the car was lapping up the road like a conjurer swallowing up yards of ribbon. But I glanced at the speedometer needle, and it was trembling at 50 kilometers, and thereby passed in slow succession pines. Then, too, I remember meeting two small, pale-faced schoolboys in their books held together by strap, and I talked to them. They both had unpleasant bird-like features, making me think of young crows. They seemed a little afraid of me, and when I drove off, kept staring after me, black mouths wide open, one taller, one shorter. And then with a start, I noticed that I had reached Königsdorf, and looking at my watch saw that it was almost 5. When passing the red station building, I reflected that perchance Felix was late and had not yet come down those steps I saw beyond that gaudy chocolate stand, and there was no means whatever of deducing from the exterior air of that squat brick edifice whether he had already passed there or not. However that might be, the train by which he had been ordered to come to Königsdorf arrived at 2:55, so that if Felix had not missed it, oh, my reader, he had been told to get up at Königsdorf for that march north, following the highway as far as the 10th kilometer marked by a yellow post, and now I was tearing along that road. Unforgettable moments, not a soul about. During winter the bus ran there but twice a day, morning and noon, and the entire 10-kilometer stretch all that I met was a cart down by a boy horse. At last, in the distance, like a yellow finger, the familiar post stood up, grew bigger, attained its natural size. It wore a skull cap of snow. I pulled up and looked about me. Nobody. The yellow post was very yellow indeed. To my right, behind the field, the wood was painted a flat gray on the black drop of a pale sky. Nobody. I got out of my car, and with a bang that was louder than any shot, slammed the door after me, and all at once I noticed that from behind the interlaced twigs of a bush growing in that ditch there stood looking at me, as pink as a waxwork, with a jaunty little mustache, and really quite gay. Placing one foot on the footboard of the cart, and like an enraged tenor, slashing my hand with the glove I had taken off, I glared steadily at Felix. Grinning uncertainly, he came out of the ditch. "You scoundrel!" I uttered through my teeth, with extraordinary operatic force. "You scoundrel and double-crosser!" I repeated, now giving my voice full scope and slashing myself with the glove still more furiously. All was rumble and thunder in the orchestra between my vocal outbursts. "How did you dare blab, you cur? How did you dare? How did you dare ask others for advice, boast that you had your way, and that at such a date and at such a place? Oh, you deserve to be shot!" Growing din, clangor, and then again my voice. "Much have you gained, idiot. The game's up. You've blundered badly, and not a goat you will see, baboon." Crash of cymbals in the orchestra. Thus I swore at him with a cold avidity, observing the whole expression. He was utterly taken aback and honestly offended. Pressing one hand to his breast, he kept shaking his head. That fragment of opera came to an end, and the broadcast speaker resumed his usual voice. Let it pass. I've been scolding you like that as a pure formality, to be on the safe side. My dear fellow, you do look funny. It's a regular make-up. By my special order, he had let his mustache grow. Even waxed it, I think. Apart from that, on his own account, he had allowed his face a couple of curled cutlets. I found that pretentious growth highly entertaining. You have, of course, come by way. Have I told you? I inquired, smiling. Yes, he replied. I followed your orders. As for bragging, well, you know myself. I'm a lonely man and no good at chatting with people. I know and join you in your sights. Tell me, did you meet anyone on this road? When I saw a cart or something, I hid in the ditch, as you told me to do. Splendid. Your features, anyhow, are sufficiently concealed. Well, no good loafing about here. Get into the car. Oh, leave that alone. You'll take off your bag afterwards. Getting quick, we must drive off. Where to? He queried. Into that wood. There? He asked, and pointed with his stick. Yes, right there. Will you or won't you get in, darn you? He surveyed the car contentedly. Without hurry, he climbed in and sat down beside me. I turned to the steering wheel, and with the car slowly moving, ick. And once again, ick, we left the road for the field. Under the tires, thin snow and dead grass crackled. The car bounced on humps of the ground. We bounced too. He spoke the while. I'll manage this car without any trouble, Bump. Lord, what a ride I'll take, Bump. Never fear, Bump, Bump. I won't do it any harm. Yes, the car will be yours for a short space of time, Bump. Yours. Now keep awake, my fellow. Look about you. There's nobody on the road, is there? He glanced back and then shook his head. We drove, or better say crept, up a gentle and fairly smooth slope into the forest. There among the foremost pines we stopped and got out. No more with the longing of ogling indigence, but with an owner's quiet satisfaction. Felix continued to admire the glossy blue ichors. A dreamy look came into his eyes. Quite likely. Please note that I am asserting nothing, merely saying quite likely, quite likely. Then his thoughts flowed as follows. What if I slip away into this nasty two-seater? I get the cash in advance, so that's all right. I'll let him believe that I'm going to do what he wants and roll away instead, far away. He just can't inform the police, so he'll have to keep quiet. And me in my own car. I interrupted the course of those pleasant thoughts. Well, Felix, the great moment has come. You're to change your clothes and remain in the car all alone in this wood. In half an hour's time it will begin to grow dark. No risk of anyone intruding upon you. You'll spend the night here. You'll have my overcoat on, just to feel how nice and thick it is all. I thought so. Besides, the car is quite warm inside. You'll sleep perfectly. Then as soon as the day begins to break, we'll discuss that afterwards. Let me first give you the necessary appearance, or we'll never have done before dark. To start with, you must have a shave. A shave? Felix repeated after me with a silly surprise. How's that? I've got no razor with me, and I really don't know what can find in a wood to shave with. Barring stones. Why stones? Such a blockhead as you ought to be, shaven with an axe. But I have thought of everything. I've brought in the instrument. I'll do it myself. Well, that might be funny. He chuckled. Wonder that'll come of it. Now mind you don't cut my throat with that razor of yours. Don't be afraid, you fool. It's a safety one, so please. Yes, sit down, someone. Here on that footboard, if you like. He sat down after having shaken off his knapsack. I produced my parcel and placed the shaving articles on the footboard. He had to hurry. The day looked pinched and wan. The air grew duller and duller, and what a hush it seemed, that silence, inherent, inseparable from those motionless boughs, those straight trunks, those lustreless patches of snow here and there on the ground. I took off my overcoat so as to operate with more freedom. Felix was curiously examining the bright teeth of the safety razor and its silvery grip. When he examined the shaving brush, put it to his cheek to test its softness, it was indeed delightfully fluffy. I had paid 17 marks for it, 50 for it. He was quite fascinated, too, by the tube of expensive shaving cream. Come, let's begin, I said, shaving and waving. Sit a little sideways, please, otherwise I cannot get at you properly. I took a handful of snow, squeezed out a curling worm of soap into it, beat it up with a brush, and applied the icy lather to his whiskers and mustache. He made faces, leered, a frill of lather had invaded his nostril. He wrinkled his nose because it tickled. Head back, I said, farther still. Rather awkwardly, resting my knee on the footboard, I started scraping his whiskers off. The hairs crackled, and there was something disgusting in the way he got mixed up with the foam. I cut him slightly, and that stained it with blood. When I attacked his mustache, he puckered up his eyes, but bravely made no sound, although it must have been anything but pleasant. I was working hastily. His bristles were tough. The razor pulled. Got a handkerchief? I asked. He drew out some rag of his pocket. I used it to wipe away from his face very carefully. Blood, snow, lather. His cheeks shone now, brand new. He was gloriously shaven. In one place only, near the ear, there showed a red scratch running into a little red ruby, which was about to turn black. He passed his palm over the shaven parts. Wait a bit, I said. That's not all. Your eyebrows need improving. They're somewhat thicker than mine. I produced scissors and nearly clipped off a few hairs. That's capital now. As to your hair, I'll brush it when you've changed your shirt. Going to give me yours? He asked, and deliberately felt the silk of my short collar. Hello, your fingernails are not exactly clean, I exclaimed blithely. Many a time had I done Lydia's hands. I was good at it, so that now I had not much difficulty in putting those 10 rude nails in order. And while doing so I kept comparing our hands. His were larger and darker, but never mind, I thought. They'll pale by and by. And as I never wore any wedding ring, all I had to do to add to his hand was a wristwatch. He moved his fingers, turning his wrist this way and that, very pleased. Now quick, let's change. Take off everything, my friend, to the last stitch. Ugh, grunted Felix. It'll be cold. Never mind. Takes 1 minute only. Please hurry up. He removed his old brown coat, pulled off his dark, shaggy sweater over his head. The shirt underneath was a muddy green with a tie of the same material. Then he took off his formless shoes, peeled off his socks, darned by a masculine hand, and hiccuped ecstatically as his bare toe touched the wintry soil. Your common man loves to go barefoot. In summer, on gay grass, the very first thing he does is take off his shoes and socks, but in winter, too, it is no means a pleasure. Recalling as one does childhood, perhaps, or something like that, I stood aloof, undoing my cravat, and kept looking at Felix attentively. Go on, I cried, noticing that he had slowed down a bit. It was not without a bashful little squirm that he let his trousers slip down from his white, hairless thighs. Lastly, he took off his shirt. In the cold wood there stood in front of me a naked man. Incredibly fast with a flick of dash of Fergoli, I undressed, tossed over to him my outer envelope of shirt and drawers deftly. While he was laboriously putting that on, plucked out of the suit I had shed several things, money, cigarette case, brooch, gun, stuffed them into the pockets of the tightest trousers which I had drawn on in the swiftness of a variety virtuoso. Although a sweater proved to be warm enough, I kept my muffler, and as I had lost weight lately, his coat fitted me almost to perfection. Should I offer him a cigarette? No, that would be in bad taste. Felix, meanwhile, had attired himself in my shirt and drawers. His feet were still bare, and I gave him socks and garters, but noticed all at once that his toes needed some trimming, too. He placed on his foot the footboard of the car, and we got into a bit of hasty pedicuring. They snapped loud and flew far, and those ugly black parings. In recent dreams I have often seen them, specking the ground much too conspicuously. I am afraid that he had time to catch a chill, poor soul, standing there in his shirt. That he washed his feet with snow, as some bathless rake in Mospont does, and pulled on Maupassant does, and pulled on the socks without noticing the hole in one heel. Hurry up, I kept repeating. It'll be dark presently, and I must be going. See, I'm already dressed. God, what big shoes. And where's that cap of yours? Ah, I see it is. Thanks. He belted the trousers. With the provident help of the shoehorn, he squeezed his feet into my black buckskin shoes. I helped him to cope with the spats in the lilac necktie. Finally, gingerly taking his comb, I smoothed his greasy hair well back from brow and temples. He was ready now. He stood before me, my double, in my quiet, dark gray suit, surveyed himself with a foolish smile. I investigated pockets, was pleased with the lighter, replaced the odds and ends, but opened the wallet. It was empty. You promised me money in advance, said Felix coaxingly. That's right, I replied, withdrawing my hand from my pocket and disclosing a fistful of notes. Here it is. I'll count out your share and give it to you in a minute. What about those shoes? Do they hurt? They do, said Felix. They hurt dreadfully, but I'll hold out somehow. I'll take them off for the night, I expect. And where must I go to with that car tomorrow? Presently, I'll make it all clear. Look, the place ought to be tidied up. You scattered your rags. What have you got in that bag? I'm like a snail. I carry my house on my back, said Felix. Are you taking the bag with you? I've got half a sausage in it. Like to have some? Later. Pack in all those things, will you? The shoehorn, too, and the scissors. Good. Now put on my overcoat, and let us verify for the last time whether you can pass for me. You won't forget the money? He inquired. I kept on telling you I won't. Don't be an... We are on the point of settling it. The cash is here in my pocket, in your former pocket, to be correct. Now buck up, please. He got into my handsome camel hair overcoat, and with special care put on my elegant hat. Then came the last touch, yellow gloves. Good, just take a few steps. Let's see how it all fits you. He came toward me, now thrusting his hands into his pockets, now drawing them out again. When he got quite near, he squared his shoulders, pretending to swagger, apping a fop. Is that all? I kept saying aloud. Wait, let me have a thorough... Yes, seems to be all. Now turn. I'd like a back view. He turned, and I shot him between the shoulders. I remember various things, that puff of smoke hanging in midair, then displaying a transparent fold and vanishing slowly, the way Felix fell, for he did not fall at once. First he terminated movement still related to life, and that was a full turn almost. He intended, I think, swinging before me in jest as before a mirror, so that inertly bringing that poor piece of foolery to an end. He already came face to face me. Slowly spread his hands as if asking, what's the meaning of this, and getting no reply, slowly collapsed backward. Yes, I remember all that. I remember, too, the shuffling sound he made on the snow, when he began to stiffen and jerk, as if new clothes were uncomfortable, and soon he was still, and then the rotation of the earth made itself felt, and only his hat moved quietly, separating from his crown and falling back, mouth opened as if it were saying goodbye, for its owner again bringing to one's mind the stale sentence, "All present bared their heads." Yes, I remember all that, but there is one thing memory misses. The report of my shot. True, there remained in my ears a persistent singing. It clung to me and crept over me and trembled over my lips. Through that veil of sound I went up to the body and with avidity looked. There are mysterious moments, and that was one of them, like an author reading his work over 1,000 times, probably in testing every syllable, and finally unable to say of the brittle of words whether it is good or not. So it happened with me, so it happened. But there is the maker's secret certainty, which never can err. At that moment, when all the required features were fixed and frozen, our likeness was such that I really could not say who had been killed, or I or he. And while I looked, it grew dark in the vibrating wood, and with that face before me, slowly dissolving, vibrating fainter and fainter, it seemed as if I were looking at my image in a stagnant pool. Being afraid to besmirch myself, I did not handle the body, did not ascertain whether it was indeed quite dead. I knew instinctively that it was so, and my blood slid with perfect exactitude along the short, air-dividing furrow, which both Will and I had grooved. Must hurry, cried old Mr. Murray, as he thrust his arms through his pants. Let us not imitate him. Swiftly, sharply, I looked about me. Felix had put everything, except the pistol, into the bag himself, yet I had self-possession enough to make sure he did not drop everything, and I went so far as to the brush of the footboard, where I had been cutting his nails, and to unbury his comb, which I had tramped into the ground and now decided to discard later. Next I accomplished something planned a long time ago. I had turned the car and stopped it a bit in timbered ground, slightly sloping down roadward. I now rolled my little Icarus a few yards forward so as to make it visible in the morning from the highway, thus leading to the discovery of my corpse. Night came sweeping down rapidly. The drumming in my ears had all but died away. I plunged into the wood, repassing as I did so not far from the body, but I did not stop any more, only picked up from the bag, and unflinchingly at a smart pace, as if, indeed, had I not those stone-heavy shoes on my feet, I went round the lake, never leaving the forest, on and on, the ghostly gloaming, among ghostly snow, but how beautifully I knew the right direction, how accurately, how vividly I visualized it all, when in summer I used to study the paths leading to Edinburgh. I reached the station in time. 10 minutes later, with the serviceableness of an apparition, there arrived the train I wanted. I spent half the night in clattering, swaying, thirdless carriage on a hard bench, and next to me were two elderly men playing cards, and the cards they used were extraordinary, large, red and green, with acorns and beehives. At midnight I had to change. A couple of hours later I was already moving westwards, and then in the morning I changed anew, and this time into a fast train. Only then, in the solitude of the lavatory, did I examine the contents of the knapsack. Besides the things I crammed into it lately, blood-stained handkerchief included, I found a few shirts, a piece of sausage, 2 large apples, a leathern sole, 5 marks in a lady's purse, a passport, my letters to Felix. The apples and sausage I ate there and then, in the W.C., but I put the letters into my pocket and examined the passport with the liveliest interest. It was in good order. He had been to Mons and Metz. Oddly enough, this pictured face did not resemble mine closely. It could, of course, easily pass for my photo, still made an odd impression upon me, and I remember thinking that here was the real cause of this being so aware of our likeness. He saw himself in a glass, that is to say, from right to left, not sun way as in reality. Human fast-headedness, carelessness, slackness of senses, all was this revealed by the fact that even the official definitions of the brief list of personal features did not quite correspond with the epithets of my own passport left at home. A trifle to be sure, but a characteristic one. And under profession, he, that numbskull who had played the fiddle surely in the way lackadaisical footmen in Russia used to twang guitars on summer evenings, was called a musician, which at once turned me into a musician too. Later in the day, at a small border town, I purchased a suitcase, an overcoat, and so forth, upon which both bag and gun were discarded. No, I will not say what I did with them. Be silent, British riders. And presently a very unshaven gentleman in a cheap black overcoat was on the other safer side of the frontier, heading south. Chapter 10. Since childhood I've loved violets and music. I was born at Zwickau. My father was a shoemaker and my mother a washerwoman. When she used to get angry, she hissed at me in check. Mine was a clouded and joyless childhood. Hardly was I a man than I set forth on my wanderings. I played the fiddle. I'm a left-hander, face oval, not married. Show me one wife who is true. I found the war pretty beastly. It passed, however, as all things pass. Every mouse has its house. I like squirrels and sparrows. Czech beer is cheaper. If one could get shod by a smith, how economical. All state ministers are bribed, and all poetry is bilged. One day at a fair I saw twins. You were promised a prize if you distinguished between them. So carroty Fritz cuffed one of the two and gave them a thick ear. and that was the difference. Golly, what a laugh we had. Beatings, stealing, slaughter, all is bad or good, according to circumstances. I've appropriated money whenever it came my way. What you've taken is yours. There's no such thing as one's own or another's money. You don't find written on a coin, belongs to mother. I like money. I've always wished to find a faithful friend. We've made music together. He'd have bequeathed me his house and his orchard. Money, darling small money, darling big money. I've roved about, found work here and there. One day I met a swell fellow who kept saying he was like me. Nonsense, he was not like me in the least. But I did not argue with him, being rich, and whoever hobnobs with the rich can well become rich himself. He wanted me to go for a drive, and instead, leaving him to his business in Queer Street, I killed the bluffer and robbed him. He lies in the wood, there's snow on the ground, crows call, squirrels leap. I like squirrels. That poor gentleman in his fine overcoat lies dead not far from his car. I can drive a car. I love violets and music. I was born at Zwickau. My father was a bald-headed, bespectacled shoemaker, and my mother was a washerwoman with scarlet hands when she used to get angry, and all over again from the beginning, with new absurd details. Thus a reflected image, asserting itself, laid its claims. Not I sought a refuge in a foreign land, not I grew a beard, but Felix, my slayer. Ah, if I'd known him well, for years of intimacy, I might have even found it amusing to take up new quarters in the soul I inherited. I would have known every cranny of it. In the corridors of its past, I would have enjoyed all the use of its accommodations, but Felix's soul had studied very curiously, so that all I knew of it were the bare outlines of his personality, 2 or 3 chance traits. Should I practice doing things with my left hand? Such sensations, however nasty, were possible to deal with more or less. I was, for example, rather hard to forget how utterly he had surrendered himself to me, that soft-stuffed creature, when I was getting him ready for his execution, those cold, obedient paws. It quite bewildered me to recall how pliant he had been. His toenail was so strong that my scissors could not bite in at once. Its grooved roundlet blade, at the jag of a tin corned beef, envelops the king. Is a man's will ready so powerful as to be able to convert another into a dummy? Did I actually shave him? Astounding! Yes, what tormented me above all when recalling things was Felix's submissiveness, the ridiculous, brainless, automatic quality of submissiveness. But as said already, I got over that. Far worse was my failure to put up with mirrors. In fact, the beard I started growing was meant to hide me, not so much from others as from my own self. Dreadful thing. Hypertrophied imagination, so it is quite easy to understand that a man endowed with my acute sensitiveness gets into the devil of a state about such trifles as reflection in a dark looking-glass or his own shadow falling dead at his feet. Und so weiter. Stop short, you people. I raise a huge white palm like a German policeman. Stop. No sighs of compassion, people. None whatever. Stop. Pity. I do not accept your sympathy, for among you there are sure to be a few souls who will pity me. Me, a poet misunderstood. Mist, vapor, in the mist a chord that quivers. No, that's not verse. That's from old Dusty's great book, Crime and Slime. Sorry, Schuld and Schön. German edition. Any remorse on my part is absolutely out of the question. An artist feels no remorse, even when his work is not understood, not accepted as to that premium. I know, it is a bad mistake from the novelist's point of view, that in the whole course of my tale there is, as far as I remember, so very little attention devoted to what seems to have been my leading motive, greed of grain. How does it come that I am so reticent and vague about the purpose I pursued in arranging to have a dead double? But here I am assailed by odd doubts. Was I really so very, very much bent upon making a profit? Did it really seem to me so desirable, that rather equivocal sum, that worth of a man in terms of money, and a reasonable remuneration for his disappearance? Or was it the other way around, and remembrance, writing for me, could not be truthful to the end, act otherwise, and attach any special importance to talk in Orlovius' study? Did I describe that study? And there is one other thing I would like to say about my posthumous moods. Although in my soul of souls I had no qualms about the perfection of my work, believing that in the black and white wood there lay a dead man perfectly resembling me, yet as a novice of genius, still unfamiliar with the flavor of fame, but filled with the pride of that escort's self-astringency, I longed to the point of pain for that masterpiece of mine, finished and signed to the 9th of March in a gloomy wood, to be appreciated by men, in other words, for the deception, and every work of art is deception to art successfully, as to the royalties, so to speak, paid by the insurance firm. That was in my mind a matter of secondary importance. Oh yes, I was the picture artist of romance. Things that pass are treasured later, as the poet sang. One fine day at last, Lydia joined me abroad. I called her at a hotel. Not so wildly, I said with a grave warning, as she was about to fling herself into my arms. Remember that my name is Felix, and I am merely an acquaintance of yours. She looked very comely in her widow's weeds. Just my artistic black bow. and nicely trimmed beard suited me. She began relating, yes, everything had worked just as I had expected, without a hitch. It appeared she had wept quite sincerely during this crematory service, when the pastor, with a professional catch in his throbbing voice, had spoken about me, and this man, this noble-hearted man, who I imparted to her my further plans, and very soon began to court her. We are married now, I and my little widow. We live in a quiet, picturesque place. In our cottage we spend long, hazy hours in the little myrtle garden, with its view of the blue gulf far below, and talk very often of my poor dead brother. I keep recounting to her new episodes from his life. Fate, kismet, said Lydia with a sigh. At least now in heaven his soul is consoled by our being happy. Yes, Lydia is happy with me. She needs nobody else. How glad I am, she says sometimes, that we are forever rid of our Delian. I used to pity him a good deal, give him a lot of my time, but really, I could never stand the man. Wonder where he is at present. Probably drinking himself to death, poor fellow. That's also fate. In the mornings I read and write. Maybe I shall soon publish one or two little things under my new name, a Russian author who lives in the neighborhood, who highly praises my style and vivid imagination. Occasionally Lydia receives a line from Orlovius, New Year's greetings, say. He invariably asks her to give his kindest regards to her husband, whom he has not had the pleasure of knowing, and probably thinks the while, ah, here is a widow who is easily comforted. Poor Herman Karlovich. Do you feel the tang of this epilogue? I shall concocted it according to classic recipe. Something is told about every character in the book to wind up the tale, and in doing so, the dribble of their existence is made to remain correctly, though summarily, in keeping with what has been previously shown in their respective ways. Also, a facetious note is admitted, poking sly fun at the life's conservativeness. Lydia is as forgetful and untidy as ever, and left to the very end of the epilogue there is, pour la bonne blouche, some especially hearty bit, quite possibly having to do with the insignificant object which is just flinked by in some earlier part of the novel. You may still see on the wall of the chamber the same pastel portrait, and as usual, whenever he looks at it, Herman laughs and curses. Venice, farewell. Turgey, farewell. Dusty, dreams, and rather tight ones at that. Who cares anyway? Let us return to our tale. Let us try to control ourselves better. Let us omit certain details of the journey. I remember that when I arrived at Pignan, almost on the Spanish border, the first thing I did was try to obtain German newspapers. I did find a few, but there was nothing in them yet. I took a room at a second-rate hotel, a huge room, with a stone floor and walls like cardboard, on which there seemed to be painted the sienna-brown door leading into the next room, and a looking-glass with only one reflection. It was horribly cold, yet the open hearth of the preposterous fireplace was no more adapted to give heat than a stage contrivance would be, and when the chips brought by the maid had burned out, the room seemed colder still. The night I spent there was full of the most extravagant and exhausting visions, and as the morning came, the feeling sticky, prickly all over, I emerged into the narrow street and inhaled the sickening rich odors. It was crushed among the southern crowd jostling in the marketplace, and it became quite clear to me that I simply could not remain in that town any longer. With shivers continuously running down my spine and a head fairly bursting, I made my way to the Syndicate d'Initiative, where talkative individuals suggested a score of resorts in the vicinity. I wanted a cozy, secluded one, and when toward evening a leisurely bus dropped to me at the address I had chosen, it struck me that there was exactly what I desired. Apart, alone, surrounded by cork oaks, stood a decent-looking hotel, a greater part still shuttered, the season beginning only in summer. A strong wind from Spain worried the click fluff of the mimosas. In a pavilion providing one of the chapel, a spring of curative water gushed, and cobwebs hung in the corners of its dark windows. Few people were staying there. There was a doctor, the soul of the hotel, and the sovereign of the table d'hote. He sat at the head of the table and did the talking. There was the parrot-beaked old fellow in the alpaca coat, who used to produce an assortment of snorts and grunts, and when which a light patter of feet, a nimble maid servant of trout, which he had angled in the neighboring stream. There was a vulgar young couple come to his hole all the way from Madagascar. There was a little old lady in a muslin georgette, a schoolmistress. There was a jeweler and a large family. There was a finicking young person who had stylized a first vicomtesse. There was a comtesse, and finally, which brings us to the time I am writing this, Marquis, all used to the doctor's exertions, who does all he can to enhance the establishment's reputation. Let us not forget the mournful commercial traveler from Paris, representative of a patented species of ham, nor the course of a fat abbé who kept drawing about the beauty of some cloister in the vicinity, and to express it better, he would pluck a kiss from the meaty lips, pause to the semblance of a heartbeat. That was all the collection, I believe. The beetle-browned manager who stood near the door with his hands clapped behind his back, and followed with surely I, the ceremonial dinner. Outside a riotous wind raged, These novel impressions had a beneficial effect upon me. The food was good, I had a sunny room, and it was interesting to watch from the window, the wind roughly upturning the several petticoats of the olive trees which tumbled. In the distance, against the merciless blue sky, there stood out the mauve-shaded sugar cone of the mountain resembling Fujiyama. I was not much out of doors. It frightened me, the thunder in my head, the incessant, crashing, blinding March wind, that murderous mountain draft. Still, on the second day, I went to town for the newspapers, and once again there was nothing in them, and because of the suspense exasperated me beyond measure. I determined not to trouble about them for a few days. The impression I made upon the table d'hote was, I am afraid, one of gruff unsociability, although I tried hard to answer all the questions addressed to me, but in vain did the doctor press me to go to the salon after dinner, the stuffy little room with a cottage piano out of tune, plush armchairs, and a round table littered with touring advertisements. The doctor had a goat's beard, watery blue eyes, and a round little belly. He fed in business-like and very disgusting manner. The method of dealing with poached eggs was to give the yolk an underhand twist with a crust of bread, which landed it whole in an accompaniment of juicy intake of saliva in his wet, pink mouth. He used to gather with gravy-soaked fingers the bones left after the meat course on people's plates and wrap up his spoil anyhow and thrust it into his pocket of his ample coat. By doing so, he evidently aimed at being taken for an eccentric character. C'est pour les pauvres chiens, the poor dogs, he would say, and says so still. Animals are often better than human beings, an affirmation that provoked, and goes on doing so, passionate disputes, the abbey waxing especially hot. Upon learning that I was a German and a musician, the doctor seemed quite fascinated, and from the glances directed at me, I concluded that it was not so much my face, on its way from the unshavenness to beardedness, which attracted my attention, as my nationality and profession, in both of which the doctor perceived something distinctly favorable to the prestige of the house. But he would buttonhole me on the stairs or in one of the long white passages and start upon some endlessly gossiping, now discussing the social faults of the hand deputy, then deploring the abbey's intolerance. It was all getting a little upon my nerves, although diverting after a fashion. As soon as night fell and the shadows of the branches, which a solitary lamp in the courtyard caught and lost, came sweeping across my room, a sterile and hideous confusion filled my vast, vacant soul. Oh no, I have never feared about dead bodies, just as broken, shattered playthings do not frighten me. What I feared all alone in the treacherous world of reflections was to break down instead of holding on to a certain extraordinary, gladly happy, all-solving moment, which it was imperative I shall attain. The moment of artist's triumph, of pride, deliverance, bliss, was my picture a sensational success, or was it a small flop? On the 6th day of my stay, the wind became so violent that the hotel could be likened to a ship at sea in tempest. Window panes boomed, walls creaked, and the heavy evergreen foliage fell back with a receding rustle, and then lurching forward stormed the house. I attempted to go out into the garden, but at once was doubled up, retained my hat and miracle, and went up to my room. Once there, standing deep in thought at the window, amid all the turmoil and tenebulation, I failed to hear the gong, so that when I came down to lunch, I took my seat at the table. The third course was in progress, giblets, mossy to the palate, with tomato sauce, the doctor's favorite dish. At first I did not heed the general conversation, skillfully guided by the doctor, but all of a sudden noticed that everyone was gazing at me. "Et vous, and you," the doctor was saying to me, "what do you think upon this subject?" "What subject?" I asked. "We were speaking," said the doctor, "of that murder, chez vous, in Germany. What a monster a man must be," he went on, anticipating with an interesting discussion, "to insure his life and then take another's. I do not know what came over me, but suddenly I lifted my hand and said, 'Look here, stop,' and bringing it down with my clenched fist, I gave the whole table a bang, and that made the napkin ring jump into the air, and I cried in a voice which I did not recognize as mine, 'Stop, stop, how dare you? What right have you got? Of all the insulting, no, I won't stand it. How dare you? Out of my land, out of my people. Be silent, be silent,' I cried even louder. 'You dare tell me to my face, and in Germany, be silent.' As it was, they had all been silent for a long time already since that moment when, from the bang of my fist, the ring had started rolling. It rolled to the very end of the table and was cautiously tapped down by the jeweler's youngest son. A silence of exceptionally fine quality. Even the wind, I believe, had ceased booming. The doctor, holding its knife and fork, froze. A fly froze on his forehead. I felt a spasm in my throat. I threw down my napkin and left the dining room, with every face automatically turning to watch me pass. Without pausing in my stride, I grabbed the newspaper that lay outspread on a table in the hall, and went to my room, sank down upon my bed. I was trembling all over, strangled in rising sobs. Convulsed with fury, my knuckles were filthily splashed with tomato sauce. As I poured over the paper, I still had time to tell myself that it was all nonsense, a mere coincidence. One could hardly expect Frenchmen to hear of the matter, but in a flash my name, my former name, came dancing before my eyes. I do not recall exactly what I learned from that particular paper. Since then I have perused heaps of them, and they have got rather mixed up in my mind. They are now lying somewhere about, but I have not the leisure to sort them. Well, I remember, however, that I was immediately grasped two facts. first, that the murderer's identity was known, and second, that the victim was not. The communication did not proceed from the special correspondent, but was merely a brief summary of what presumably the German papers contained, which was something careless and insolent about the fashion in which it was served up between the reports of a political fray and a case of psittacosas. And I, unspeakably shocked by the tone of the thing, it was in fact so improper, so impossible in regard to me, that for a moment I even thought it might refer to a person bearing the same name as I, for such a tone is used when writing of some half-wit hacking to bits a whole family. I understand now, it was, I guess, a ruse on the part of the international police, a silly attempt to frighten and rattle me, but not realizing this, I was at first in a frenzy of passion, and spots swam before my eyes, which kept blundering into this or that line of the column, when suddenly there came a loud knock at the door. I shut the paper under my bed and said, "Come in." It was the doctor. He was finishing chewing something. "Écoutez," he said, having hardly crossed the threshold. "There has been a mistake. You have wrongly interpreted my meaning. I'd very much like—" "Out!" I roared. "Out you go." His face changed, and he went without closing the door. I jumped and slammed it with an incredible crash. Then, from under the bed, I pulled out the newspaper, but now I could not find in it what I had just been reading. I examined it from beginning to end. Nothing. Could I have dreamt reading it? I had started looking through the pages afresh. It was like a nightmare where the thing gets lost. But not only can it be discovered, but there are none of the natural laws which would lend the search a certain logic, instead of which everything is absurdly shapeless and arbitrary. No, there was nothing about me in the paper, nothing at all. I must probably have been in that awful state of blind excitement, because a few seconds later I noticed that the paper was in an old German rag, and not the Paris one which I had been reading. Diving under the bed again, I retrieved it and reread the trivially worded and even libelous communication. Now it dawned upon me that what had shocked me most shocked me as an insult. Not a word was there about a resemblance. Not only was it not criticized, for instance, they might have said, at least, "Yes, an admirable resemblance, yet such and such markings show it to be not his body," but it was not even mentioned at all, which left one with the impression that it was some wretch whose appearance was quite different from mine. Now one single night could not very well have decomposed it. On the contrary, his countenance ought to have acquired a admirable quality, making our likeness still more sharply chiseled. But even if the body had been found quite a few days later, thus giving playful death time to tamper with it, all the same stages of decomposition would have tallied with mine. Darned hasty way of putting it, I am afraid, but I am in no mood for niceties. The affected ignorance of what to me was most precious and all-important struck me as extremely cowardly trick, implying as it did that from the very first everybody knew perfectly well that it was not I, that it simply could not have entered anybody's head to mistake the corpse for mine.